All right, guys. So we got to talk about a white liberal conversation. Okay, conversation on race between white liberals, because what else are white liberals obsessed with more than race? Okay, they're the most race obsessed people in this country. Okay, and this conversation is between Bill Maher and John Mellencamp. Now, John Mellencamp is a liberal rock star who clearly has had too much soy put in his milk, okay? And he is essentially having this conversation with Bill Maher about racism, and he goes on to claim that he believes that only a minority of black people today, I think he says 2 to 3%, are better off than what black people were under slavery, when black people were slaves in this country, which in and of itself is just a ridiculous comment. But I'm going to play as much context as I can so you guys can see exactly what this guy was talking about, what he was saying. Take a look.
Just give me an example, and then I'll get off this. But I'm just curious of a recent example in the last couple of years, specifically of a incident of racism that you saw, like on tour or something, that is in this.
I have a 29-year-old son. One of his best friends was black, right? They went somewhere in Los Angeles. The guy got in an argument with this little skinny black kid, waited for him to walk outside of the bar and ran him over and killed him. How much more of a fucking example do you want?
I mean, yeah, I'm not denying that things like that happen in this country.
But I'm just saying it's not any better. I mean, you may.
Well, that's what we're arguing about. I think
we're not arguing about anything. We're having a discussion.
Well, we're disagreeing.
No,
and that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay to disagree.
You say it in one of your songs.
Yeah,
freedom of speech.
Yeah,
right.
I wrote a song that I never recorded because I felt it was wrong, but it was called "From the Fucking Cotton Fields to the Plague Fields."
Yeah.
So my point is that, yeah, so what?
I would say that
us white people love to have black people entertain us.
I would say that the playing fields are a lot better than the cotton fields. That's what I would say about that. Maybe I'm crazy, John, but it seems like making no money as a slave picking cotton was not as good as playing left field for the Yankees. I mean, I'm sure there were reasons why. Dave Winfield has some beefs against Steinbrenner. I'm sure.
No doubt, there is 1 or 2% of black people in America who have a better life.
Oh, stop. That's what you think? 1 or 2%?
Okay, let's say 10%. I'm just pulling a number out of my ass.
It is that. That's where it belongs.
Hey, I just pulled a number out of my ass.
I know, but I'm telling you, that's just not true. But,
Well, okay, well.
I mean,
listen.
We do have statistics.
Talk to my son. He'll tell you.
Well, he saw one very horrific incident. Maybe that has colored his thinking.
What do you think? That's the only incident that happens?
Of course not. And it isn't. Again, the FBI has data on hate crimes.
The FBI?
Oh, they're in on it?
No, they're not in on it. But it's like the government. You trust the government? I don't trust those fucking people. I'm willing to throw them.
No, I've been often a skeptic of lots of things about the government. But do I think the FBI is making up hate crime statistics? No. Do I think they're exactly as they present them? No, I don't, because...
Okay, if they're not making them up and they're not presenting them honestly, what do you call it?
It's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Probably one of the most ridiculous conversations that I've heard in a long time. I guess this is the type of conversations that you have when you are drunk in mid-nicotine buzz, right? Which is probably what was going on with John Mellencamp, who, in my opinion, was damn near incoherent in regards to what he was talking about. But let's get into what he's talking about, because what he was talking about is just so ridiculous, okay? He was talking about racism in America, which is a conversation that the liberal white person loves to have, because a lot of them feel guilty. They feel really guilty about what they believe white people have done in this country to black people. And for that, they are forever in debt to black people, and they need to kiss black people's feet and worship at the altar of wokeness and ask for forgiveness and to perpetuity, right? Which, again, John Mellencamp seems to be one of these white liberals, okay? He's asked about, hey, what is an example of racism that you have, seen or experienced, right, towards black people or whatever? He doesn't give an example of his own personal experience. He actually gives an example of an experience that his son allegedly had, in which his son, I guess, was out in LA with his black friend, and then, I guess his black friend got ran over by a white person, and he uses this as an example of racism. However, this example, there's no evidence that it had anything to do with race. Okay, I mean, he left out a lot of details that I think would be pertinent to understand, okay, what were the motivations behind it happening. Now, in this interview, in this conversation, he says, well, they got in an argument, right? And that's the only thing he said, that he got in an argument. So if they got in an argument, then that means that they got in a domestic dispute. A domestic dispute does not equal racism. A domestic dispute is just a domestic dispute. They got in an argument. Just like if a white person gets in a domestic dispute with another white person, and then that white person goes and tries to kill the white person in response to domestic dispute, of course, you're not going to say that, well, that happened because the white person is racist against whites, right? You wouldn't come to that conclusion. So why would you come to that conclusion in a situation where a white person commits an act of violence against a black person? That doesn't automatically mean that it's racist. And that's one of the most annoying things I'm saying. If a black person commits an act of violence against a white person, nobody ever jumps to the conclusion that, well, it was because the black person was racist, right? People always just assume, well, the white person must have done something to provoke the black guy, right? The black guy must have been provoked. However, if a white person commits an act of violence against a black person, the first thing that the woke revolutionaries jump to is that, well, it must have been racist. It couldn't have been no other explanation or reason why this happened. It must have had something to do with racism. Okay, we see this time and time and time again. So again, the example that he gave is not his own personal experience. And secondly, it's not a clear-cut example of racism because we don't have any evidence that this happened because of race. Now, maybe it did. It's possible. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm just saying from the story that he told, that doesn't sound like that it happened because of race. So the next part of this ridiculous conversation I want to talk about is this idea is that somehow black people today are still living like slaves. Only 2 to 3% of black people are living better than black people were living as slaves. Almost suggesting that, again, a vast majority of black people today are living the same way that they were as slaves back in the day. Okay, or that, who knows, maybe he could be suggesting that black people were better off as slaves, right? Maybe that's what he could be saying. But he's essentially saying at the very least, hey, black people, things haven't improved much since you were slaves, right? You guys are still living like slaves, which is just factually inaccurate. Bill Maher had to call BS on that, right? Because anybody with any basic level of knowledge and common sense when it comes to slavery and how people are living today know that that's just not true, right? The average black person in America is living like a king. Not just compared to how black people were living in slavery, but compared to a vast majority of people in the world. Point blank, period. Okay, black people are in the top probably 5 to 1%. Okay, when we're talking about the rest of the world population, black Americans. Okay, we're living like kings compared to most people who've ever lived on the planet, right? And that's just a fact, okay? That's a fact. So to sit here and to make this silly claim that, well, black people went from cotton fields, picking cotton, to entertaining whites, right? Which, by the way, I mean, they're entertaining whites for millions of dollars, right? Apparently, that's worse, right? It's worse to be paid to entertain white people, right? Pay millions of dollars to entertain white people is worse than to pick cotton for white people for free, right? Where you don't get paid, you're actually forced into labor, okay? You're whipped, you're beaten, all the horrible things that happen to slaves happen to them, right? That's actually better than being for example, an athlete who under your own free will can decide whether or not you want to take this check from the white man, this multi-million-dollar check from the white man, whether or not you want to show up for the white man, whether or not you want to entertain the white man. Under your own free will, you can decide. Apparently, that's worse. That's worse. And this is Cuckoo for Cocoa Puff world, right? This is the world that a lot of these people who happen to be liberal live in, right? They live in imaginary land where black people are oppressed victims who are living worse lives today than they were as slaves, which is just a ridiculous thing to even think about, okay? It's just ridiculous. But again, this is just another example of how liberals don't want to acknowledge that we have made progress when it comes to racism in this country, because that's the grift. If you ever actually make progress, then the grift becomes less profitable, okay? You can't make money if anti-racism works, right? If anti-racism actually works, right? If anti-racism is creating less racism, eventually you will not get paid, right? Eventually you won't need the Ingram X kidneys of the world. You won't need the race hustlers of America anymore, because they've actually solved the problem of racism. And this is why diversity, equity, inclusion doesn't work. This is why all of these so-called anti-racist programs don't work. They just cause more hate and division. So then these people continue to get paid into perpetuity, right? That's what they want, right? That's the grip. Okay, so again, what you're hearing come out of this guy's mouth is the same old thing we always hear from liberals to justify their race fear-mongering and dividing this country is, well, we haven't made any progress on race, right? Even though we clearly have. Black people are still worse off than they was when they were slaves. Again, it's just ridiculous. It really is. Especially considering the fact that if this guy was conservative, okay, if he was a conservative, then he would be called racist, right? To suggest that black people were better off as slaves. If a conservative white man said this, people will be crying racism all over the place. Well, he thinks black people are better off in chains, right? He thinks black people are better off as slaves, but because he's saying it from a liberal perspective of, well, black people are better off as slaves because we haven't made any racial progress. Okay, it's fine, right? It's totally fine, even though it's effectively the same thing. Amazing. I don't think this guy has actually thought that deeply about it. I think he's just guilty, right? I think that he's probably not very smart. And his son told him about some incident that his son thought was super racist or whatever, even though we don't really have evidence that it was racist, at least as far as the story that was told on Bill Maher's podcast. But hey, one white person did something bad, therefore this country is just terrible. All white people in this country are terrible. Again, if you apply the same line of logic to when a black person commits a crime against a white person, then we will be talking about how there's an issue of black on white racism. But we actually never talk about that, even though, that happens, right? It happens quite a bit, okay? Happens quite a bit. But again, if you was to say that, well, this happened because of racism, a black person attacked a white person or whatever because of racism, people look at you like you're ridiculous to just assume that from the get-go. And that's kind of how we need to start looking at these people who just assume that just because a white person did something bad to a black person, it automatically means that, hey, it happened because of racism. And then using that as a way to say, well, all whites are racist. This is evidence and proof that society is racist. Only in a racist society can something like this happen. It's just ridiculous. But anyways, I'm glad that Bill Maher checked him on it, right? I'm glad that Bill Maher showed some signs of reason, okay, of common sense. And that's the one thing I do like about Bill Maher is that even though he has a severe case of Trump derangement syndrome and he's a liberal and he supports Democrats, he ain't woke, okay? Or at least put it this way, he's not super woke, right? He might be a little woke, but he ain't really super woke, okay? I think he's still a reasonable individual outside of Trump. I think when it comes to Trump, he's not reasonable at all, but outside of Trump, he is somewhat reasonable. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a black conservative perspective. Peace.